All right. If Shannon passes out, who is going to resuscitate her? Alyssa.
And I'm CPR certified, but I can't really do it myself.
I think Alyssa is as well. Okay, we got you covered on both sides here.
Okay.
All right, your name, hi Hart.
Hi. Yeah.
Your name tags look so great, and we need to get one for Sue and for Paul.
Yes. So, quick announcement. Actually, we made one for him, but we figured everyone knew who he was.
It might mess up my wardrobe.
So, if I could just, real quick, don't leave with them, please. If you, please. If you have to leave early, choir, why don't we just put them right here on this table right outside? I'll collect them at the end of class and make sure they're all in a box and on the where they. I'll make sure they need to go where they need to go. But if you just have to leave early, or when you leave, when you exit, if you'll just take them off and just put them on the table right out here. Does that sound good? Good plan? Yeah. And if you don't have one, let me know. They're probably printed. I printed, or John Eric rather printed all 114 names, but I only have 60 name badges, so I'm swapping some in and out because, as I was telling Linda and Dwight, whatever's on my to-do list, I get about half done these days. So, but I think we're good with everybody.
Doing great.
And then we put you in a hot room.
Melting. Okay, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you. Can I go get you a glass of ice water?
I have so much to down.
Can we pour Gatorade on
We can get one of those kid pools and just let it bite. I'll just sit in it. That won't be inappropriate at all.
Dave?
Shannon, I have
Beginning today, if some of you saw in the email, Sunday morning I'll put a notepad back there for prayer requests that you want me to add to the email list. It's very difficult when we have prayer concerns at the end to catch all this stuff. So if you want it to be on our email chain, it'll be there every Sunday morning on a clipboard, and just fill it out, and I'll get it at the end of class when I'll be the last one out of here, and then I'll put it on the email.
And as a reminder to those who are part of our virtual class, we do have an email address that you can send stuff in as well that I'm sure at some point is on the screen with that. Okay, hello everyone. Just a little program announcement. Next Sunday I will not be with you because I'll be with the adventurers in Virginia, a bunch of y'all and others, and they're very excited about that. But that is not an excuse to stay away from Sunday school if you're here in Dallas. Brad Russell will be substituting for me. Brad and his wife Kenda are almost members here. They're actually planning to join that Sunday as well. Brad is a former pastor who then worked for the Baptist Standard in marketing and now is working for a marketing research firm. Great guy. You will really enjoy him. And he will pick up wherever we leave off in Titus today. So don't stay away just because I'm not here. All right? Very good. I'll be watching.
How big?
Maybe. Okay, so we are working our way through the little book of Titus. And last week we spent a lot of time digging down in a couple of verses on what it means to be the husband of one wife. And I'm not going to rehearse that again because we gave that a pretty thorough examination. So we're going to pick up today in verse 6, I believe is where it is, right?
Starts over.
It starts over. So just a reminder, what we have here in this part of Titus is a sort of a descriptive or prescriptive list for someone to be an elder or a bishop. The two terms are sort of used interchangeably here in the early church. And we talked last week about what that means and what is the corresponding thing in the church today. And the titles and categories that we come up with may change, but the idea is that this is a church leader of some sort. There are different models of that. So here's the thing I want us to talk about as we get into this list in a little more detail. Should there be a different standard spiritually for someone who holds an office in a church apart from someone who's a member of the church?
Yes.
And why?
Because more people see him than they do the member of the church.
Okay. What if the member of the church is a very successful business person? It influences a lot of people.
Well, the Bible says, whom much is given, much is expected. So whatever you go, wherever it is.
Someone else?
Don't you think people in leadership always have a responsibility to do a little more? I mean, that's why they're there, and they set a good example. To me, that's just logical.
That
Doesn't
seems
mean they have to be perfect. But
right.
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 Well, are you asking about more responsibility, or are you asking being more spiritual, having a deeper connection, having what exactly are you asking?
Well, I think now you're digging into the interesting part of this, because maybe there's a higher level of accountability, but
Yeah.
aren't we all called to be spiritual in the same way? And aren't we all human in the same way?
I think that a lot of people that come be into a new place or new ministry or something, that they need people to talk to tell them, you know, in spirit, to tell them what's going on, to be spiritually connected to a person's needs. And I think when you're first come into the church, you need these people.
So part of what Paul is doing here, both in Titus and in 1 Timothy, which has parallel passages, right, about deacons and others, part of what he's doing is he's trying to protect the witness of the young church, to make sure that there are people of character, known to be people of character, leading the church. Now, I will tell you from where I sit, that is a concern that really ought to extend to much broader levels than we sometimes think, right? To hold that over here, the other thing he's trying to do is to make sure that those who are leading the church understand the faith. So we would call that today being educated, having some spiritual training. So we're not just going to put a new Christian up with no study to be the pastor of a church. All sorts of things not good happen with that, both for that person and for the church, right? However, I'm thinking of times that I have known individuals of this church or other churches who had such a bad reputation in their line of work or in the place where they live that other people said, if that person is a member of your church, I don't think I want to be there. Or if that person is on your committee, we're not going to do business with you because we know how they operate. True story. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying all that to say, it's very easy when we read this passage to say, well, this doesn't apply to me. It applies to me, right? You're a pastor, it applies to you. Okay, I'll take that, but let's share it. Because each of us as representatives of the body of Christ are looked at in a way. And so I don't want to let anyone off the hook today. Is that fair?
But I do agree that there are elders in the church who have been Christians for a long time, who do know more, and then there's a new Christian who is not educated in the faith. So you will need to make sure that your beliefs line up with the church, and if they don't, maybe, if it's misinterpreted or whatever, you would want to find a church who you could agree with.
Sure. And the other part of that is, these things are given as benchmarks, not as absolute mandates, because we're still dealing with human people here, right? And we talked about that last week about the standard on whatever it means to be a one-woman man or a one-man woman. Is sort of a binary choice, where these others are much more, there's levels, right, of how spiritual you may be. So are we okay on that as we begin? All right. So just a reminder, Paul's saying to Titus, I left you behind in Crete so that you would put in order what remained to be done, and you would appoint elders, he says. Then he's going to switch to the word bishops here in just a moment. So we dealt with verse 5. Would someone read for us verses 6 through 9? Would someone volunteer to read verses 6 through 9?
I will.
All right, Charlotte.
And I'm in the American Standard Version. Namely, if any man is above reproach, verse 6 through 9. we're back
6
there.
through 9, huh?
Okay, the husband of one wife, having children who believe, not accused of what is it?
Dispensation.
Somebody say it for me. Or rebellion. For the overseer must be above reproach as God's steward, not self-willed, not quick-tempered, not addicted to wine, not pugnacious, not fond of sordid gain, but hospitable, loving what is good, sensible, just, devout, self-controlled, holding fast the faithful word, which is in accordance with the teaching, so that he will be able both to exhort in sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict.
All right. So this is really a list. And we need to go through and figure out what do the things on this list mean. We'll be like the child who's given instructions and wants to argue about the meaning of each instruction. What do you mean, take out the trash? Which trash? How often? Anyone? Yeah. So we dealt with the married ones. I want to just pop back for a minute on this word blameless at the beginning of verse 6. And we mentioned this last week. This is someone who is above charges being filed against them. Someone who, if you threw a charge at them, it would stick. Is what that means. All right. Now, there's a word that your version, I don't know what that word was, but
D-I-S, dissipation.
okay, interesting word.
not familiar
NRSV
with
translates it debauchery.
Yeah.
I might have got you.
Debauchery. And the idea behind this word is an abandoned person, someone who cannot be saved, someone who is so incorrigible.
Excellent choice.
Isn't that a great word? Incorrigible. That they, so we might in Texas call this person a scoundrel, right? We're not wanting people who are beyond repair.
That's right.
Christianity is showing.
Right? That's what that word means. Or someone who is rebellious. Now, you may be saying, why are you up there then? Right? The idea here is that someone who is not willing to be under the authority of God's word. Someone who is rebelling against the very authority of the faith that we are charged to teach and to preach. So, someone who's acting out against the very faith. So, you would not, and dear God, this has happened from time to time, you would not someone who's not a believer to be the pastor of a Christian church. That doesn't seem like a good idea, right? You need to buy in, I think, to the basic idea of the faith. Now, we may debate about what is the basic idea of the faith. So now in verse 7, he switches to the word bishop or overseer. And we talked about the interchange or the interchangeability of these words in the New Testament. Noting that this person is God's steward. God's steward. So what is a steward?
Someone who serves God.
Or anything, right? Someone who serves someone else's cause, right? If you put your money in a bank, the bank is a steward of your resources. They're accountable to do the right thing with that, right? If someone names you the executor of their will, you're a steward of their estate, right? And so that's the role here. And it's helpful for us all to remember that when we come together as the church, we are not here to do the church's business. We're here to do Jesus' business, right? We are the stewards of the gospel message entrusted to us, not of an institution. It just so happens there is an institution that gets in the way sometimes. So anyone remember the parable of the stewards that Jesus taught us?
Oh, the three men, yeah.
Yeah, what are you going to do with the talent you've been given? Right. And so if you think about Jesus teaching about stewardship, and you read in Titus, Paul talking about being a steward of the gospel, that doesn't mean to go hide out and put the gift in the ground, right? It means to be there and be robust and investing and do something good with it. So I say that because you could read this list and say, well, church leaders ought to be so cautious they never do anything, right? But yet we have a responsibility in stewardship. Thoughts on that?
Well, the first part of the passage talks about what you shouldn't do, but then it goes on to talk about how you should be and
That's
how
right.
you should reach out. So
Yeah.
it's not just talking about not doing, he's talking about doing.
That's right. It's not just the negative, it's also the positive. Now I want to pause for a moment. And you know how I love to beat up on televangelists, right? And you know where this is going. I think there's a problem this week with everyone beating up on Joel Osteen. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to be beat up on, but maybe for something different,
I was
right?
gonna say it before different.
There was a good article someone published this week saying, here's why everyone loves to hate Joel Osteen. And it's about the theology behind him. So I wasn't in Houston this week. I don't know whether there was water around Lakewood Church or not.
There was.
I have no idea whether the church is accessible, whatever. I do think, and this is the free part I'll give you today, the bonus. Mark's number one rule of communication for an institution or person is you should always tell your own story first before you let someone else define the story for you. And he's smart enough to know this, and he really mucked it up on this one because he let everyone define his story before he came out and said it. So whatever the problem was there, I don't know. It probably wouldn't have been a comfortable place to be anyway. The Superdome was not great for evacuees during Katrina either, those stadium seats and all.
Neither was this convention center.
Yeah, at least you got some flat space there. So I don't know what's going on with that, but that aside, the health and wealth and prosperity gospel that he teaches and preaches is so antithetical to what we've seen going on in Houston this week and in all of South Texas that I would say the events of the past week have really highlighted the heresy of that type of theology, and I'm using the word theology loosely here, because what we see in the flood is that rich and poor, spiritual and unspiritual, people of all races, colors, everybody's affected equally when the waters come up. And it's not because you didn't have your best life now, right?
Mark, the thing that bothered me is that I saw him in his yacht in the water, and he was passing out a book. He wasn't passing out food, water.
Or inviting people on.
He was passing
So
out what?
that really bothered me.
His book, yeah. He was handing out copies of his book.
Copy of his book.
Yeah.
So think about that as we go through this, Linda.
I just agree with you though, that I think it's a shame that everybody's just piled onto that instead of saying, well, what did I do? A lot of the people that are twittering everywhere have done one thing, I bet you.
Yeah.
And I just think you need to think about your own self a little
We
bit.
all want to have someone to beat up on, right? And sadly, he's an easy target in this, right?
Did you see a picture of his house on Facebook? It's bigger than our whole church plant.
Right,
It's bigger than the church.
Not his church, this church.
Oh, this church.
yeah. So part of the deal, and I'm telling this story because when you don't measure up to the things we're talking about here today, this is what Paul is saying. Whenever it's time, when there's a real crisis that hits, it's easy to criticize you because you've been such a bad model before. So when Paul says someone ought to be blameless, charges shouldn't stick against them. There's a reason we think, oh, well, Joel Osteen probably would have done that, because it's the very idea of what he's been teaching, right? That it's all about health and prosperity and not difficulty, right? So it's credible whether he did or didn't do what he did, I don't know. But it's able to stick, right? So that's something to lay against this. Okay, so verse 7, God's steward must be blameless, must not be arrogant. That word speaks for itself. Or quick-tempered. Let's deal with those two first. Dear God in heaven, how many arrogant pastors do I know? In humility, he said.
A few come to mind.
So there is a sense in which you've got to have a lot of self-confidence to get up in front of a crowd of people every week, right? So that sort of leads to that. And yet, you don't want someone who's so timid that they are, afraid to stand up and speak, right? So again, there's a balance that needs to happen. Self-aware, self-confident maybe, but not thinking too much of yourself, which Paul says to all of us elsewhere in Scripture, not to think too highly of yourself, each of us. Quick-tempered or addicted to wine. Notice the description here is addicted to wine. It does not say no wine. I'm not making a case for this. Terrell, what do you say?
No wrong case.
I said does not love wine. It says addicted to wine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the disciples were not drinking grape juice,
Wine. Good stuff.
despite what Mr. Welch believed. All right. Or violent or greedy for gain, Joel Osteen. See? There we are. But now we're at the positives, verse 8. Must be hospitable. Hospitable. This is a word that means loving strangers, welcoming of guests. Loving strangers, welcoming guests. Allison, my wife Allison, last week taught an entire lesson in perennial class on the biblical concept of hospitality. It is a thread that runs from the beginning of the Bible to the end. It is woven throughout Scripture, the demand, the call, the admonition to be hospitable, to be loving and welcoming of other people, and whoever those people are, to welcome them. And yet the church has built its reputation on being not welcoming for whatever silly reason. You don't go to the right school, or you don't live in the right neighborhood, or you don't make enough money, or you don't look right. I mean, we all know this has happened along the way, right? And that's the antithesis of what the gospel is about, according to Paul. Comments or thoughts on that? I'm talking way too much. Preston?
One of the most quick-tempered person I have ever known was a Baptist pastor. He was so intense about everything. He'd been a missionary to the Philippines. He did attract a lot of people, but he didn't know when he'd get out there to play softball with his team, and he'd just go into a rage, so much that my guys said, "I'm not going to play him anymore." And you didn't see that in the pulpit. Well, I never heard him preach, but I've also known some angry preachers, and who used a bully pulpit to stir up people the wrong kind of way.
Rooted out of their own anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sadly, there's a lot of people who want to follow anger, wherever it may be. I saw there was a hand over here. Tara?
Okay, it's actually embarrassed Mark. I've known Mark and Allison now for four years now. And the first time we met, we were having dinner with our kids, and I had to pull Tori aside. We were meeting at a burger place, and I had to pull Tori aside. He's a Baptist minister, does he drink? Friday night, and I was going to have a beer. And she's like, yeah, he drinks wine, it's okay. But that was like one of the first steps in realizing what a great person he was. And then we have talked several times before that, and then,
Now I'm blushing.
Yeah, but, he does represent what is in here. And so that's, and that's kind of the reason we came to this church, is because we tiptoed in and kind of looked around, and, it was talking to Mark and then talking to George. So this has a lot of good meaning in there.
Thank you. So, thank you, Terry, for that wonderful story. And I think, have you ever seen a cake that looks so absolutely delicious on the outside, and then you cut into it, and what's inside does not match what's on the outside? And you think, why in God's name am I eating this cake, right? This is a waste all the way around, but it looks so good. I feel this way about most of the desserts at Luby's.
Some of those with that running about that taller.
They look better than they taste, in my opinion. And I think the point here is, and this is where it goes to all of us, because someone can have a good interaction with a pastor or a leader in a church, and then show up at church and determine that the cake is not the same thing as the icing.
But that's true for all of us.
That's right. That's where all of us are part of the cake in this. I'm sorry. There was a hand. Darrell.
I have two stories. One similar. When I first came to Dallas, you invited me to your home for, I think, Thanksgiving. And my friend from El Paso was with me, and I said, I'm going to his house for the first time. I need to bring something. So I was going to bring a bottle of wine, and my friend said to me, are you crazy? He could be a recovering alcoholic. So I went, and I didn't bring anything. And when I got to Mark's house, Mark says to me, what would you like to drink, Darrell? And I said, what do you have? And boy, was I pleasant to hear what he had to drink. I said, yes! I was so happy. So that's
just for the record, I'm not much for the alcohol myself, but Allison will gladly receive your wine.
And the second story, it's just an observation. Why did people in the past, why were they so into hospitality? Strangers, where did all these strangers come from? If they had a family reunion like Noah and all of them on the ark, they were all families. So I guess they didn't like each other, why they eventually became strangers. Because if you are on the ark and you're the only survivors, and then the world goes on from there, why are everybody strangers where no, you just have strangers and strangers? It's all family.
Okay, so there's an answer that I'll give to that. Why is the Bible so filled with talk about hospitality? And it's because of the Middle Eastern culture that it's rooted in, right? The Middle Eastern culture, if you've ever traveled in or been around Middle Easterners, hospitality to this day is very, very important culturally there. And so if you go back to Bible times, as we say, there were no hotels. There were no restaurants. If you were a traveler, you were pretty much at the mercy of people who extended you hospitality along the way. And so this became a very important virtue, a trait to extend hospitality to strangers along the way. And we've lost that in our culture.
I don't know, if you're from Texas, you always stay with family. If somebody's second cousin's wife's uncle, you'll call and say, hey, we're coming to this day.
Yeah, but even that doesn't happen as much anymore because we're all so self-sufficient, right? So it's like with the evacuees that we've seen from Houston. Some have family they were able to go stay with, but a lot of people didn't, right? Or all their family was equally displaced, and so there's a difference. I think I was thinking this week about the people who are in hotels versus the people who are in shelters. And there's all sorts of people who are displaced that we don't know about because they're staying with family or friends, right? So that's the root culturally of this, and hopefully that permeates the church as well.
I had two friends, one from Lebanon and one from India, that wanted to share their food and their drinks and things with me, and they really feel honored to do it, and they're kind of hurt if you don't accept it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, in our work with Gateway of Grace and refugees, when we put on an event, even if you're a refugee, you want to bring food, right? And it would be very improper to say, no, you may not bring food.
Well, their feelings were hurt, if you don't accept what they've offered to you, and had a little trouble with that little tiny cup of coffee that could walk.
Donna?
Well, I think because of the hurricane, hospitality is really surfacing among churches, working with Hindu temples, mosques are opening up, working with Jewish synagogues, Buddhist temples, so it's kind of all working together down there, and it's a beautiful thing, and I'm sorry that it had to come to this, to get us all in there together offering hospitality. And I hope it continues in the conversations between the world religions.
We've seen a ton of this week. I mean, it is beautiful to see, and what a welcome respite has been from all the anxiety. And that's easy to say when we're on dry land. I told people that we got the pleasant side of the hurricane because our temperatures dropped this week. And you could actually walk outside in the afternoons. And that's at the expense of other people, I realize, who were getting the storm.
And having 5,000 or 6,000 people in one spot, can you imagine that?
Sounds dreadful, actually.
Yeah, and no bath.
Right.
I mean,
So that's being hospitable, a lover of goodness. Now, that means just what it says. A lover of goodness. Someone who values and appreciates goodness instead of evil. Right? Now, here's a good one. Prudent. NRSV translate this word, prudent. The idea behind this is very similar to a word that comes later at the end of verse 8, self-control. These two words are very similar. That's the meaning of this word too. To be genuinely temperate is the idea. Well-balanced is the idea. Not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, but biblical moderation describes a person who does not command himself, but rather is commanded by God, someone once said. Right? The root of this word, this is really cool, the root of this word is the root of the English word diaphragm. What helps you breathe, right? Your diaphragm. That is the muscle that regulates our breathing that gives us life. It controls our breath and our heartbeat. So the idea here, an example that's given is an opera singer controls the length of their tones by the diaphragm, which also controls the ability to breathe and moderates heartbeat. Therefore, it brings safety to the body and keeps it properly controlled. The idea behind prudent and self-control is to be in balance with this, to be mastered from within. Does that make sense? Thoughts about that? Temperate is another way to say that. All right. Verse 9, must have a firm grasp of the word that is trustworthy in accordance with the teaching, so that he may be able both to preach with sound doctrine and to refute those who contradict it. So do you see this is a double-edged thing. It's both offensive and defensive, active and reactive. Now, a lot of times, we who get knowledge are one or the other. We're only defensive with our knowledge, correcting everyone, or we're only offensive with our knowledge, annoying everyone. Paul's calling for a balance here, to be able to speak the truth, but also to be able to understand when someone else is not speaking the truth in this. Does that make sense? How would that be important in your mind in church life today? How might that play out?
Well, that goes into hospitality. You can't just tell someone how wrong they are and be considered hospitable, correct?
Right.
So you have to have that balance and that temperate to be able to speak the truth when sometimes that truth may be correcting someone else's, what they think their knowledge base is, or where they're coming up, translations of the Bible, what they believe, what you say one verse is meaning versus them. So it all goes together, being hospitable, being temperate and balanced, and understanding there is, and the way that you approach people. I mean, it kind of all just goes together.
I think that's beautifully said. You got to take these things as a whole. And when you get to the end of the line, you have to ask, who can measure up to this? Right? I just won't want to run away at this point.
But you have to do it every Sunday.
Yeah.
Kind of nudge us different ways.
Yeah.
And or every day, since his title is.
Yeah.
Right, but I mean, in this classroom, he does it.
Yeah.
If somebody comes up with something so far off left, you try to bring them.
I try to bring you back, yeah, without saying, boy, that was the stupidest thing I've ever. Peaches?
I approach it this way. When in confusion, go to where Christ speaks to his people. Did he pick 12 perfect men to be his disciples?
Absolutely not.
Of course not. Diverse ages, economic situations, and so forth, and an outright thief. A zealot. What was a zealot to do? Stick a knife in the first Roman they saw. He picked 12 very diverse men. If Christ could accept them, why can't I?
Well said. Norman?
I think that if you give it also depends on the attitude in which you have given it. I mean, some of us are just filthy rich and you can write a check. And then some of us do other things. But you have to have in your heart the right attitude as well as the ability.
God loves a cheerful giver.
Yes.
I've heard that.
Indeed. Well, the idea that we want to encapsulate here, oh, yes, Mike.
Yes, so the truth and what you just read, so doesn't that presume that you have absolute knowledge of absolute truth, which, I'm sorry, none of us have?
None of us do.
So,
I think it means that you're responsible to do the best you can with what you know, what you have. But you're also responsible, I think, to know as much as you can.
Yes.
Right? And therein lies the rub, because we too often, oh gosh, I could go off on a whole riff on this. That's the problem when someone says, give me that old time religion. It's good enough for me, right? Well, no, it probably isn't. Because hopefully God has said something new since the old time religion that you knew, right? So the call to faith is not a call to being static. It's a call to being open and learning and inquiring and wanting to know. Just like, the example that we might often use is, would you want to go see a doctor who had never read anything new since they graduated from medical school in 1952? I don't want to see that doctor. I can probably go get my own cod liver oil, whatever the cure is from them. There's right, and we, as the people of God, continue to learn. The Spirit works among us, and we have new understanding, and we're able to, as we grow, as we age. All right, I want to get to verse 10 and 11 if I can. There are also many rebellious people, Paul says, idle talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision. Now, what's he talking about here? Who are these people? Not just the Jews, but they are the people who are claiming in order to be a Christian, you must be a Jew first. So in order to become a follower of Christ, you must go through the Jewish rituals, including circumcision. So this is shorthand for that. And Paul says those people must be silenced. So here's the guy who just made an appeal for moderation and kindness and hospitality and being a lover of goodness and being self-controlled. And he says, but those people, you got to shut them up. How do we reconcile these two ideas?
Everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation.
And that was limiting who could come in, who could get in the boat.
That's right.
Yeah, the whole circumcision group were not being hospitable. And that's what he was preaching earlier. So
Yeah, David, that's right. Now we're in the conundrum that we find ourselves in so often. How can we be inclusive of people who are not inclusive? How can we be tolerant of people who are intolerant? How can we be welcoming to the community of faith people who don't share the faith? Right? There is a dilemma here. Right? So what Paul is acknowledging that affects us today is there are some limits. This is not anything goes. Here's what the church is, broadly, not narrowly. And those who are claiming a different path to salvation through works are not part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we need to not listen to them. Darrell?
Are comedians idle talkers? Because I love them.
I think that kind of idle talk is okay most of the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's another way to think about this. in all of our relationships, and there are people who are toxic people to us. You know what I'm saying? And what you're going to learn through life is that you need to not let those toxic people in your life to ruin you. There's a boundary you've got to set for that. What the crown of circumcision was to the early church was toxic, because they were destroying the very fabric of the message by proclaiming a different message. Does that make sense? So even Paul had some boundaries here. They are upsetting whole families, he says, by teaching for sordid gain what is not right to teach. So not only are they teaching the wrong thing, they're doing it for profit. In the autocorrect, I typed in a note here, and I'm trying to remember what this word means, because it came out to be in the bicentennial world. I don't know, whatever world this is. In the biblical world, there were teachers who roamed around claiming special knowledge, and they talked about mysteries, and they set themselves up as the only bearers of the real truth. Now, I may offend someone here. My apologies in advance. But this is like someone who's gotten onto the latest multi-level marketing thing, and they've got a product they're selling you, right? And I have knowledge you don't have. If you only knew what I knew, you'd join me in this enterprise and you'd buy 15 bottles of this, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we see in this. These were people who were out claiming special knowledge and saying, I will tell you my special knowledge if you pay me for this in the spiritual world. Now, we've already talked about Joel Osteen, but I think this applies there as well. One last thing, we're going to go through verse 12 because there's a really cool thing here. It was one of them, he says, their very own prophet, who said, Cretans are always liars, vicious brutes, lazy gluttons. Now, this is really cool because what Paul is doing is referencing one of the oldest philosophical puzzles that we know of, and it's called the Cretan liar paradox. C-R-E-T-A-N, Cretan liar paradox. It originated with a guy named Epimenides in the 6th century BC, way, way back. A philosopher who was a Cretan, he was from Crete, and he famously said, as a Cretan, all Cretans are liars. Well, is that a true statement or a false statement? Because I, a Cretan, am saying all Cretans are liars. Therefore, I am a liar, and all Cretans are not liars. Or, right, anyone ever watch The Princess Bride? Okay, you know that scene there where they're trying to use the logic about which goblet has the poison in it? It's like that, right? There's another variation on this that's a classic philosophy puzzle, and some of you may have studied this in school. So imagine a postcard, and on one side it says, the statement on the other side is true. And you flip it over and it says, the statement on the other side is false. How do you solve this, right? And so what's happening here is Paul is sort of taking a bit of comic relief, Darrell, in this by referencing this well-known philosophical paradox to make fun of those who are selling spiritual knowledge for gain. It's just a little dig he's given here. It's a bit of comic relief in the middle of this diatribe. But it's sort of fun, right? Sort of fun. Okay, thoughts about that? I know yes.
Okay, this may be really off the subject, but how does all this fit with the idea of the Bible is always, our thoughts about it are always evolving, and we're always learning new things and having new things, and then there are some religions that say that they have a special knowledge, and we can think of some now.
Right.
That maybe new revelations, new spiritual leaders that after Jesus and all of that.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it is hanging on to, being open, but yet hanging on to what's important to hang on.
Yeah,
Kind
it's a
of
great question, Linda.
difficult.
Really great question. I think part of the answer is God going to give a special revelation to only some people? That seems unlikely. So this is the root problem with Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, because it's very exclusive, and it's that kind of special revelation that's happened there. On the other side, it's easier to knock out those who come up with special knowledge. I think the answer to the other side of that is to say, over the course of time, what does the church at large perceive to be the will of God? And that's why we can't just go by our own knowledge. We can certainly have opinions, right? But the larger body of the church is slower to change, which is probably good overall.
Mark, I would be somewhere to the left of center. But how does anybody know that I'm right or wrong? Or someone who's to the right of center? And how do I know whether they are right or wrong? Carlisle Marney once said, "A window that is stuck open is just as useless as one that is stuck shut."
That's a great line.
Now, actually, I've known as many liberals where it's stuck shut as I have fundamentalists where it's stuck shut. So, it is hard sometimes to discern really where we need to go with these things sometimes, particularly in the areas of behavior.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I have to stop and grit my teeth and say, well, I gotta think about this a little bit more.
I'm going to quote Doug Haney here. One of Doug's famous sayings is, "Flexibility is the best ability." Flexibility is the best ability. And I think that gets to what Preston is saying. Wherever you find yourself on the political or theological spectrum, we've got to be nimble and we've got to be flexible and responsive. Otherwise, in time, we'll find ourselves in the ditch, right?
Right.
Some of these things, the proof is in the pudding. I was watching a documentary Friday night about Venezuela and all that's happened there over the last two dictator presidencies, including now. And we can look at that and say, they should have seen that coming, right? Because the people were sold an irrational bill of goods that we can look at and say, no, that's never a good idea, right? It may feel good to you, but it's not based in any reason. We're going to fire all the people who know about the petroleum industry in our country, that's the #1 economic thing, and we're going to replace them with political appointees who don't know how to run anything. So we're going to hire 3 times the number of people and have 1/3 of the output, right? That has consequences over time, and that gets shown. But yet, some people still hold on.
Yeah, well, we should have seen it coming where America is today.
Long ago.
It didn't take a lot of perception to see where we were headed.
And to my Baylor friends, I am very worried about the football game yesterday and the outcome of that. Even I was rooting for Baylor yesterday. I hope it's not indicative.
Well, I'm glad you finally opened.
All right, on that we're going to end. Brad will pick up with you in verse 13 next week. Thanks for